Okay, let's get started, shall we? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arnold Weinfeld. I am Associate Director for the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research, and I want to welcome you today to this session on labor force and the workforce. We've got a great panel today of practitioners and researchers, including Dr. Stephen Woodbury, professor from the Department of Economics at Michigan State University, Carrie Rosingana, Chief Executive Officer with Capital Area Michigan Works, Tony Willis, who's the Chief Equity Development Officer for the Lansing Economic Area Partnership, and Tom Lambert, a Vice President with Techsmith Corporation. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors for this, the MSU Office of Government Affairs, as well as MSU Extension, and also the Kellogg Foundation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Woodbury from Michigan State University. Steve, the floor is yours. Please unmute.
I'm always a good citizen and mute myself, and then I don't unmute when it's anyway. I signed on to give a big picture overview, and I've decided to call this the pandemic and the Great Reshuffle. And I see that Arnold decided to call this, refer to the Great Reshuffle as well, rather than the Great Resignation. And the Great Reshuffle actually encompasses the Great Resignation, and I'll be talking about both. And I am not advancing here. Oh dear. Okay, did that advance? Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few recent changes in the labor market first. I'll do that as quickly as I can, then talk about the Great Resignation, and then move on to the Great Reshuffle, which is really another term for the changing structure of the labor market. And I will end on a rather pessimistic note, and I am still having trouble advancing. Okay. Okay, let's cut to the chase. And here's a picture of the labor market a month ago, the most recent statistics we have. And you can see the total population of 333 million, the civilian non-institutional population, which drops out those in the military and anyone institutionalized, so incarcerated or people in assisted living and so on. And then the people who are left are employed, unemployed, or not in the labor force. And the changes that we've seen since the pandemic have just been amazing. Right now, we have about 157 employed individuals, up from 133 million at the bottom of the pandemic recession. The number of unemployed was almost 24 million at the bottom of the recession. It's now down to 6.5 million. And the number not in the labor force has also dropped. It was 103.5 million at the bottom of the recession, and now it's under 100 million. So let's talk a little bit more. Let's look at time series of labor force participation, the employment population ratio, and the unemployment rate. The civilian labor force participation rate, of course, has been trending down. Much of this is due to the aging labor force, but you can see it just plummeted in the pandemic recession. It has come back. It's still a point or two below where it was before. And it'll be interesting to see whether it really does come back fully. I think there's some good reasons for that I'll talk about in a minute. Here is the unemployment rate, which rocketed up to almost 15% during the pandemic. It's now almost as low as it's ever been, 4%. Before the recession, it was about 3.5%. And I think I may have advanced one slide too soon because I never got to talk about the employment population ratio, which is interesting because it was gradually moving up even before the pandemic recession. And this is a big part of the tightening of the labor market before the recession. Of course, it plummeted 8 points. This is just the most amazing drop we will ever see, I suspect. And it's now back within a point or two of where it was before. So the labor market in many ways has recovered. You could debate that it is still unhealthy in some ways, and we'll talk about how it may be unhealthy in a minute. What about the Great Resignation? Well, here it is. The Great Resignation, you can see right away in the monthly quit rate. This is from the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey. And right now, the quit rate is higher than it's ever been. It's been as high as 3%, which means that each month, 3% of workers are quitting. which is truly amazing. Before the pandemic, it was a little over 2%. Before the Great Recession, you can see it barely ever got above 2%. And it falls, of course, during recessions. So, but it was high. Notice it was high even before the pandemic recession. Again, a reflection of that tightening labor market. Now, why is it so high right now? Well, early on in the recession, it could have been sort of overhang from topped-up benefits and extended benefits, the reluctance of workers to return to work out of health concerns. And now I think we were even seeing the waning of the parental need for childcare during close downs of school. So now I think it's time for other reasons that, again, we'll talk about in a minute. Let's talk about consequences and about further reasons for this. Here are my reasons again. Oh, I should mention this now. Changes in the tasks really associated with existing jobs. A couple of economists at the Chicago Fed have argued very strongly, have led to workers searching for a better match. In other words, the job they've been doing has changed in one way or another. They don't like it anymore and they look for a better match. And either they get a higher wage rate, which we'll see in a minute, or they actually move. In any case, the result has clearly been this very tight labor market. And here is a picture of the number of unemployed persons per job opening. And there are only 2 times in the history of this series. This is the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, which only goes back to 2000. There are only 2 times there have been more job openings than unemployed workers. And that was roughly the 2 years before the pandemic and now, going back to about May. So this is truly extraordinary. And now they're about a little over half an unemployed worker per job opening. So employers are really scrambling for workers. One consequence of this, well, wage growth, okay? And here's wage growth going back again to early 2000. You can see, if you've got a really good eye, that sometime around 2017, the slope of this line started to increase. Up until about 2017, the rate of growth was around 2 to 2.5% on an annual basis. Then from 2017 up until the recession, more like 4 to 4.5%. Since the recession, it's been almost 6%, which is really extraordinary. But the bad news is it's being eaten away by inflation. And we'll talk about that later as well. Now, the industries where job opening rates are unusually high are accommodation and food service, which is a bit of a surprise because that sector is shrinking overall, although there's a lot of reallocation within that sector. The other sectors are more obvious, I think, in some sense. Healthcare and social services, no surprise. Transportation, warehousing, utilities, think Amazon. Professional business services, information, think remote work. Non-durable goods manufacturing, think food processing. These represent a mix of skill levels, which is good because the wage increases we're seeing appear to be taking place across the board. Now, I'm going to show this a little further with a graphical device. That's the Great Resignation, okay? And I want to put this in the bigger framework of the Great Reshuffle, which is the changing structure of the labor market, which is, I'm going to show with this graphical device known as the Beverage Curve, which was concocted by a British economist named William Beveridge many years ago. And what it shows is the relationship between the unemployment rate on the x-axis and the job openings rate on the y-axis. And here is the Beverage Curve between 2009 and 2020. And if you look at this graph for just a minute, you'll see one other thing. I've got this 45-degree line, which shows combinations of the unemployment rate and the job openings rate, where the number of job openings and the number of unemployed workers is roughly equal. Above that line, there are more job openings than unemployed workers. Below, there are fewer job openings than unemployed workers. We're usually out here. Right now, though, and just before the pandemic recession, we were in this range where there were more job openings than unemployed workers. Now, what this Beverage Curve does is plot out the relationship between the unemployment rate and the job openings rate over a business cycle. And as you might expect, when the job openings rate is low, the unemployment rate is high. When there are a lot of job openings, the labor market tightens and the unemployment rate falls. And it's kind of interesting because the slope of this line is not constant. it's flatter out here in a recession. So when you're in a recession, 8-9% unemployment, a 1 percentage point increase in the job openings rate buys you maybe a 3 percentage point drop in the unemployment rate. So you get a lot of decrease in the unemployment rate for a given job openings increase. When you're up here where we are now, 3-4% unemployment rate, a 1 percentage point increase in the job openings rate only buys you about a 1 percentage point decrease in the unemployment rate. So that's the slope of the Beveridge curve. The other interesting thing about the Beveridge curve is that it can shift. Now, why can it shift? Well, the most common interpretation of shifting is that the farther the Beveridge curve is from the origin, the more inefficient the labor market is being at matching workers to jobs. And that can happen for any of a number of reasons. The most common reason, which is probably what we're seeing right now, is a mismatch between skills and skills of workers and the skills that employers want in the job openings. Now, here is the green line, the green Beveridge curve that I showed you before from 2009 to 2020. You can see it was actually more favorable in the 10 years before the, this is the 10 years before the Great Recession. Okay, this is the period between the Great Recession. The green line is the period between the Great Recession and the pandemic. This red line shows a more favorable trade-off between job openings and the unemployment rate. So for a given job openings rate, you used to get a lower unemployment rate. What's happened since the pandemic recession is that the Beveridge curve has shifted out, just dramatically. We've never seen anything like this. And let me show you the actual data that I drew these curves from. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Okay, these are real data points. And I tidied things up for you in those graphs a minute ago. This is the pre-Great Recession Beveridge curve, this combination of red and mustard colored dots. Here is the Beveridge curve from the Great Recession to the pandemic recession. Here is where we are now. Okay, and again, here's the job openings equals unemployment line. Okay, I won't dwell on this. What you can see, though, this is very interesting right in here. This is May. This is the most recent point, and this is going back over the last year. For about the first 6 months the last 6 months of last year, rather, the job openings rate was increasing dramatically, and nothing at all was happening to the unemployment rate. And then suddenly the unemployment rate plummeted to the great surprise of many. So what about this recent shift? Why has the Beveridge curve shifted out so dramatically since the pandemic? Remember, again, the labor market was already tight even before the pandemic. The only time we've seen such a tight labor market before, such tight labor markets was the 2 years before the pandemic recession and since May. But the labor market has just become very inefficient at matching jobs to workers. Now, we shouldn't beat up on Michigan Works for this. It's the structure of the labor market. It's nothing to do with what people are doing to try to match workers to jobs. Early in the pandemic, of course, lockdowns and uncertainty kept workers out of the labor market. Now, the Great Resignation really is the Great Reshuffle. We've got structural change in the labor market. There's bound to be mismatch between workers and workers' skills and employers' demands, especially when the change is happening so rapidly. And here are a couple of examples. As I said, retail trade has been shrinking overall, but even within retail trade, in fact, mostly within retail trade, there's a shift from traditional stores to buy online, pick up in store. That results in changed staffing. Food service, again, food service is also shrinking overall, but a shift from standard restaurant, standard cafeteria work, because more people are working at home, to takeout, delivery, ghost kitchens. Professional and IT services growing, but they're in addition changing to accommodate remote work. This is mainly an acceleration of change that was already happening. Remember, the labor market was really tight before the pandemic. Interestingly, the BLS, with its occupational projections, made some big changes early in the pandemic to its projections. It retracted those. It's now back to, we've got regular acceleration of the same structural change we saw before. But when changes have accelerated and they're happening so rapidly, there's bound to be this inefficient matching. And I am guessing I'm out of time, which is why Arnold has appeared. Is that right, Arnold? Or should I give my pessimistic note about
You're getting
inflation.
close. You've got about another minute.
Okay, that's exactly what I have to, that's exactly what I need to say this. In the last year, we've seen the most serious inflation in the last 40 years, of course. Why? Well, it's this sort of unholy combination of three factors: monetary stimulus over a period of at least 2 years, fiscal stimulus following the pandemic recession, and problems on the supply side. The last time we saw a combination like this was the late 70s, which even I can remember. Yes, I'm old enough, I admit it. There are two consequences here. One is first, they're both bad for the labor market. One is the erosion of wage increases, which we've already seen. The other is the Fed is about to raise interest rates and buy back securities, which is bound to have a dampening effect on the labor market. The last time we saw this happen, the outcome was not pretty. It was the double dip recession of the early 80s. The big question now is, can the Fed actually pull off a soft landing? And we will see. The only really soft landing the Fed has ever turned off was the recession we never saw in the mid 90s. I would be happy with a semi-bouncy landing, I think. That would be just fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Woodbury. Very informational. We did have one question. I think you kind of answered this, but we'll ask it here anyway. From Nick Pigeon, how does this change the prior consensus that manufacturing and other industries will shrink in their labor force, whereas the service industry will grow? His understanding is that the service industry is most affected by the Great Resignation or Reshuffle, and I think you kind of showed that, but any comment to that?
Yeah, I think, well, as I said, I think a lot of it's interesting, going as far back as we can tell from the data, there's much more mismatch and much more sort of job change that goes on within an industry than between industries, which is really kind of odd. We think of these massive changes from, back in the day, from agriculture into manufacturing, and in more recent decades from manufacturing to services. And yet those are kind of one-time changes, and they mostly take place generationally. Okay, someone whose parents worked on the farm, they go work in the factory. Someone who grew up whose parents worked in a factory, they go into services, more like that. So I think that's the way we see that sort of long-term structural change. What we're seeing now is more the within industry change. I don't know if that goes along with what Carrie has seen. I'll be very interested to see what the people who are more on the ground believe.
Thank you, Dr. Woodbury. And it just so happens that, yes, Carrie Rosingana is up next. Carrie is the executive director at Capital Area Michigan Works. And it does have the unique perspective of being on the ground and interacting with both employers and those seeking employment. Carrie?
Thanks, Arnold. I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to be here with all of you today. And I will say, Dr. Woodbury, a lot of the information that you were sharing is certainly what we've seen through the statistical data that we analyze as part of our roles and responsibilities here. So just to set the stage a little bit so that you know a little bit about Michigan Works and who I am and what our agency does. The Capital Area Michigan Works is a network of resources. We partner both with businesses as well as with job seekers to try to fill what Dr. Woodbury mentioned was some of those mismatches, and making sure that there's alignments between that demand and that supply that we're trying to develop and implement. Our office in our mission statement is connecting with business and strengthening our workforce. It is at the heart of everything that we do. And we also ensure that we are committed with all of the efforts that we do to being a welcoming, and that we are putting forth DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion practices into the work that we're doing, so that we can help all members of our population here within the Tri-County region of Ingham, Eaton, and Clinton counties. The Michigan Works system is a statewide system. We are just one of 16 other Michigan Works agencies, and we are bound by regions that we implement services, and we are the actual workforce development agencies for the state, receiving the federal and state dollars to make sure that we're putting forth programming that will meet the needs of the customers that we're working with, both business as well as those job seekers. So we view ourselves, and part of that methodology that we're looking at is being a demand and supply model that we're looking at. And that really gets to that heart of when we're looking at matching up what those needs are that our employers have today, and as well as what they're looking at 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We do that through a variety of different ways, starting with looking at labor market information that we receive directly from the state through the Department of Technology Management and Budget, LMI department. So we utilize the predictions that they have and their information to help guide our decisions. We also, though, go a step further than that to also make sure that we're getting real-time anecdotal feedback directly from employers that we're serving across all different sectors. And those help us then determine what are those needs looking like, whether that's credentialing, whether that's soft skills, whether that is helping someone to figure out what a career pathway model could look like within an industry. Our goal is to know what the demands are going to be so that way we can be looking at providing those supports and services through workforce development efforts that will meet the needs of our employers. So as Dr. Woodbury so candidly shared, we've seen a lot of changes from 2020 to 2022. We, in speaking with employers, have seen a lot of the things that were discussed previously by my co-presenter. On an anecdotal side of things, I think when you looked at the workforce in 2020, there was a different expectations in some ways to what you're seeing now in 2022 when we're looking at it from a job seeker perspective. In 2020, it was more of a traditional workforce model that you saw where the employer was setting the tone for what the expectations were going to be. In most cases, that would include going into the office or into the structure that you worked within on a daily basis. There was much less remote work or virtual options or even hybrid that was being done at that time. If you look at that today, we all know that that is very much changed in most industries that we are partnering with. And there's been a continued reinforcement of needing to look at not only what's going to meet the organization or business structure, but also what's going to meet the job seekers' needs. So like Dr. Woodbury and Arnold, I was really interested when we were talking about all of the names that this has had for what people are putting out there. Some are calling it the Great Resignation. Some are calling it the Big Quit. Some are calling it the Great Reshuffle. And I tend to, like my counterparts, agree that what we're seeing is a reshuffling in large extent here with our data sets. We have seen a return to the workforce. We've seen unemployment rates continue to improve throughout the course of the pandemic to where we're at now, it being close to where we were before. But what I think we have noticed that has been significant is that we are seeing people leave the workforce for different reasons. We are hearing from job seekers that they are leaving the workforce because of cultural shifts. So including both the fact that they may feel uncomfortable or unsafe, not knowing what the practices are going to be related to COVID mitigation efforts within their organization. But we're also seeing a shift in how our workers are evaluating the culture of the organization that they work for. So they're looking at, does the personal culture that they have and what is important to them match up with what they are looking for in an employer? And in some cases, this has caused people to leave the workforce, and we are trying to work to help address that in a workforce agency perspective by thinking through how do we make sure that we're communicating to our job seekers what they can do on the front end to be proactive when they're going to look at new opportunities to help them find an employer that is going to fit the skill set and the cultural needs that they have as an individual. We know that we have seen a lot of individuals also quit because of childcare. Childcare and school has been a dramatic challenge for individuals. And I will tell you, speaking about the women population, we know that there have been reports that have shown upwards of 125,000 women have left the workforce. And I heard from the director of the Labor Market Information Department with the state just last month. He quoted and said that there was 180,000 women still out of the workforce. That is dramatic. So you're talking about where there's these needs and where people still are looking for the workers, but you have this, again, disconnect from the fact that there are so many women who are out of the workforce. And what does that mean for the workforce in the years and decades to come? I think we'll still be looking to see what that looks like, but we do know that women have certainly been more adversely affected by some of the challenges that are being faced related to schooling and to childcare challenges that are at play. Now, from our perspective, I'm an optimist by nature, and I appreciate Dr. Woodbury's very realistic approach to the number side of things and what's going on. When I look at it, I don't think it has to be yes, the data is not great, but let's look at it from a cultural perspective. If there can be new opportunities that this is presenting to us to look as a country, as a culture, as a state, as a region, for where we can be strengthening what those opportunities look like in the days ahead. Finding a match between what a job seeker or the employee and the employer are looking for, and having open dialogue about what does that mean for you as an organization can really help strengthen some of those retention efforts. So we know that when there's opportunities for job seekers or for employees to be able to be a part of what the decisions are that are being made in the moment, that will help them feel safe, that will help them feel supported, that will help them feel heard, can help to strengthen some of those retention efforts that we're going to look to see with the data side of things in the days ahead. If organizations are not willing to invest some time to have those conversations, I think that's where we'll start to see some of those challenges continue to exist, because employers or employees are willing to leave now because they feel there's a cultural mismatch, not only sometimes a skills mismatch from the employer perspective and side of things. That's where I think it's really important for us all, not only in workforce development, but across the state and the systems that we have in place, whether that's childcare, whether that's the educational system that we're working with. We have to really be diligent in finding those connection points that are going to help to explore new career opportunities for people, and to help them not only just look at the tangible, what credentials, what are the hours that the business is open, what career pathway opportunities does it present, but we also have to help prepare them for how to advocate for what they're looking for. It can be as simple, and this is something that we teach through our work here at Michigan Works a lot, is to help job seekers feel empowered and willing to ask the questions in an interview setting. Tell me a little bit about what your culture is as an organization, so that they can start to understand and see a place there for themselves within that. And seeking that information on the front end is also going to show those employers that they're invested in wanting to be a part of the organization. So we always make sure that we're talking about what are the labor market demands showing now and in the future, but also how do you make sure that you are exploring opportunities that are going to be the right fit for you, as well as where you see yourself in the future. That is where our office certainly can come in and be a partner in this work. We are here to help job seekers find jobs, but we most importantly are here to help support our employer community. So we're definitely here to help both of those parties. And we also really thrive on helping to build those bridges and those connections. We know with the work that Tony does at LEAP, that is an integral part from an economic perspective of how that connects then to the workforce. So if an employer has 10,000 openings, how do we then help prepare the workforce and bring the workforce here to our region to help meet what that supply and demand is going to look like? Which I know we've had some conversations even early on, looking at that new GM announcement that came out too, is how are we going to prepare to find that workforce? And it's going to be an undertaking that we're all going to have to think strategically through. It's important to celebrate some of the successes. We know during the course of the pandemic, we had people in record numbers reach out to us to get connected, which is encouraging as well for me to know, because there are people who are still very much wanting to be a part of today's workforce and to look for those opportunities. And we've served individuals from 14 different languages that have been spoken. It's really important to think about that as part of the population we're working with. Ingham County has the second highest new American refugee resettlement opportunities across the state of Michigan. How do we help plug those individuals into some of those openings that we're seeing that are empty? So there's a lot of things that are exciting and out there, and I think there's opportunities, but it's going to take some work. And I think it's a recognition of where those supports can be put in place for us to help build those bridges for the region to be successful, as well as the larger state of Michigan. And certainly, if there's any questions anyone wants to ask today, but also in the future, we're always ready to be a partner in the region to the work for workforce development efforts. Thanks, Arnold.
Carrie, thank you so much. Really good information about what you're seeing in your role here in the Mid-Michigan area. We've got a couple of questions. I'll ask one of them now. Someone asked about when you use the term culture, are you meaning that those are some of the factors about a job that workers seem to value more now, such as better life-work balance, better treatment, better pay?
Yes.
Or are you thinking more about the cultural matching, as in the way in which workers interact with their colleagues and bosses?
I would say all of it, to be honest with you. When we're talking about culture in our office, we're talking about what are the flexibility options that someone might be looking for or require right now with childcare as an example. We're talking about what does that structure look like from leadership, top down, bottom up. You know, how does that engagement look? So when we're talking about culture, it's all of those different things. And also, I think I would be remiss to not say diversity, equity, and inclusion is a huge focus of work that we are seeing, especially in these younger generations. They are looking for that efforts from the websites, the language that you're sharing, even putting pronouns in if you're comfortable doing that. Those are things that are being really, really stressed with this younger generation. And as an organization, to stay competitive, those are things you have to think through.
Thanks, Carrie. We've got a couple more questions, but we'll hold off until the end, because I like how each of you has segued from one speaker to the next, because our next speaker is indeed Tony Willis. Tony is the Chief Equity Development Officer at the Lansing Economic Area Partnership. And Tony, greatly appreciate having you here. Even before the pandemic, one of the issues that, as Carrie noted, that was becoming more and more of an issue in the workplace were DEI efforts, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And there was great recognition that the wage gap between people of color and white Americans was continuing to grow. How can we now, as we go through this great reshuffle, how can we use this to our advantage to assist with those efforts?
No, that's a great point of your introduction, Arnold. I appreciate that. So I'll touch on that as this presentation here as well. But I will say this, always starts with intentionality to address the issue up front and knowing that these issues exist, then create programs directly towards solving those issues. So I appreciate that. I'm gonna share my screen here, everybody. And just so you know, for all the people who are joining us, our building is kind of musical. So when the rain comes down heavy, you will hear it on our roof. And I'm not sure if it echoes through my microphone or not, but it's kind of subsided right now. So I'm gonna go while the good is good. So I'm gonna go to present mode here for everybody. Give me one moment. All right. Can you guys see this correct? Okay. So here is the...
Tony, you might want to hit the presentation mode.
Okay, gotcha.
Still in.
There we go.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. So as mentioned, with LEAP, the Lansing Economic Area Partnership, we are the economic development organization for the Tri-County region, representing Ingham, Eaton, and Clinton counties here. I've been at the organization for 8 years now, and now I'm the Chief Equity Development Officer that Arnold has mentioned, and really focused on equitable economic development. And so as we get to this, I always define what is equitable economic development. And this is a slide with the most writing in it as well, but to boil it down in this space, it's really being intentional of dismantling barriers that are stopping for economic inclusion to happen, right? Whether that is bureaucracy, whether that is types of barriers of cultural barriers, or whether physical or real or perceived, how can we dismantle those barriers, and expanding opportunities to low-income individuals, communities of color, and other underrepresented people. The idea here is to create a more stronger and competitive economy that works for all, that where ownership and the benefits of economic development are felt for all and not just a selected few in that space. And so why does that matter? So this is a data point put together by Citigroup here in 2020. I use this as much as possible in the space to help illustrate the importance of economic inclusivity and its actual cost involved to not being inclusive. So this number is $16 trillion is what they established here as the amount the US economy has lost due to discrimination. And this is not due to discrimination in the entirety of the United States history. This is discrimination over the past 30 years. And this is not discrimination towards every micro group. This is discrimination towards Black people only in this space. And they use this number and they equate this number from all the different practices such as redlining or not allowing Black people to buy houses, and the wealth, as we know that home ownership is a major wealth building tool, as well as other practices when it comes to Black businesses not getting equal funding for their businesses as their white counterparts are. So you no longer have the resources to scale and grow bigger payroll, bigger operations to compete on those markets as well as practices when it comes into discrimination as in attending a university, higher education, job placement and stuff. These actually have a hard number cost into this space. I also show, this is like more of a shortened presentation I usually give in this space, but the next slide I usually show is what the economy can grow if we start addressing these issues directly. And that McKinsey group put a stat says around $1.6 trillion to the GDP over annually over 5 years if we can start addressing these inequalities that take place for sub-demographics in the space here by getting folks engaged in addressing, getting parity to resources when it comes to wealth building tactics in the future. And we mentioned about the wealth building between Black and whites in the United States. So the median white household wealth is 120,000 compared to that of the Black family, which is 24,000. So it's a drastic difference between what your actual wealth is home between your race. And so at LEAP, we are very intentional and direct about solving these hurdles that are facing, these perils that are facing certain people and demographics. And so this first slide here, I'm going to talk some about our programs that we've done as an economic development agency in this space. And then I'll also talk about our internal processes that we've instilled to make sure that we are attracting the best talent in this space as well that can be applicable to those in this call. So when it comes to equitable economic development, it's making sure those benefits are reached to as many people as possible. So we create programs. First is one and all. These portraits that you see in the background here are individuals that have participated in our one and all program, and which is a program focused on individuals that are at or below the ALICE threshold. That is the asset limited, income constrained, employed threshold. So those are households that are economically unstable, right? You have out of your 5 major needs, transportation, medical health, vehicle, housing, you're pretty much shuffling the deck, or you're one life crisis away from falling back further. You're just pretty much trading water, not having really growing to the next middle class or beyond. And in Michigan, 40%, 38% exactly, but 40% of Michigan households are at or below the ALICE threshold. So 40% of Michigan households are economically unstable. And go further here, you look at Black and Latinx or Hispanic household, that number goes up to 60% for Black households in Michigan and 54% for Latin and Hispanic households. In the city of Lansing directly, the city of Lansing proper, 53% of city of Lansing households are at or below ALICE. And the only way to get out of ALICE, I'd say this, is you can't save your way out of poverty. You have to earn more income. That is the only way. You can't coupon, discount, and budget your way out of poverty. Increased wages is the only way to get out of that area, right? And so it hurts when inflation has stagnated the wage growth that we've seen over the time, because now your money which could go further, is not going as far as we've seen, which kind of Dr. Woodbury talked earlier on his presentation about how inflation has pretty much ate up any benefit of the wage increases that we've seen thus far. So we created a program, we're running entrepreneurship to create a pathway for individuals that are of ALICE threshold. This program focuses on mentorship, because not just what you know, it's who you know. So we have an educational component as well as a mentorship component. And then we give seed funding into these entrepreneurs as well. We've done 5 cohorts over the last 2 years with graduation rate, or graduation of 116 individuals that have gone through the program. It's around 24, 26 individuals a cohort. The next program is Level Up we designed here, which is focused on enhancing Black and Brown business operations. When we saw the initial funding mechanisms that came out, COVID relief mechanisms that came out at the start of the pandemic, think of PPP, EIDL, and beyond, those initial 2 waves of funding, Black and Brown businesses were disproportionately underfunded or weren't as likely to get funded as their white counterparts. And they came to a few reasons, and Stanford did a case study about this. And first was that the programs themselves were focused on organizations that had a certain number of employees and as well as certain entity type, both being a corporation or LLC. The majority of Black and Brown businesses are sole proprietors or DBAs in that space. So when you think of just the entity type alone, the application, how things are scored internally from the bank, seeing the front point, putting it through the federal mechanism, there were a number of areas where pretty much you saw a tremendous drop off in Black and Brown businesses to even get awarded that funding. So we created programs to help assist the conversion of DBAs to LLCs, as well as create operating agreement, balance statement, GAAP, general accepted principle, accounting principles for each businesses, because that was the other issue we saw, that a number of small businesses, which most underrepresented businesses are technically micro businesses, not just small as 500 employees or less. I mean, like really, majority of small business in America are under 25 employees in that space. And so really helping them establish these better operational principles. This coming Thursday, we'll announce a new program called Elevate, which is a Black Business Accelerator program. When we forward this out, part of my notes here, I have details to links that showcase the case for enhancing Black business ownership, what it means to the economy as a whole. Both McKinsey and Brookings Institute have done a number of research on those that show what that means to the economy as a whole in that space. And then the Diversity Star Award is going to highlight our partners that are, really making DEI as a cornerstone of their culture and how they're looking at talent as a whole. Because top talent doesn't know geographic or demographic boundaries. It's fluent amongst everybody. And so as a region, us to be the most prosperous region, we have to be the most welcoming, the most inclusive to attract that top talent, no matter where it may lie and live and be at. Whoever persons that possess that talent, we want them to be here in the Lansing region. So moving forward to the next slide here, here's some more operational processes that we took as an organization to make sure that we are both retaining talent and being as inclusive and as equitable as possible. So first, that badge, the digital badge, our entire team at LEAP has gone through a DEI training and received a digital badge because of that from leadership and beyond. It was a year, some change because the pandemic extended it out a little bit, but we've all gone through it. And everything from ageism to different phobias to conversations about race and the economic impacts and historical parts of systematic racism. All these things are an understanding of what's going on in somebody's life as a person in the space, right? The ongoing trainings, we have monthly learning prompts as an organization. So we engage in some, whether it's a podcast, a video, a chapter of a book, cast we just read as our last book we read as a team, some type of monthly engagement to keep the conversation going, because there's a journey to get there. And this is so important because when it looks at DEI, and this kind of goes to my last slide here, I just kind of jump to it, but it all starts with understanding. Because once you understand somebody or something, you can value it. And once you value it, you're less likely to treat it poorly because you value something. Think of your most prized possession because you value that thing. You understand it, the intricacies, and it means something to you. And it goes that way. Understanding's first. Because when you understand something, you value it, you treat somebody or something with respect in that manner, in that realm. DEI policy, as LEAP, we have done this for the last 6 years. We've all signed our diversity, equity, inclusion statement annually at a board meeting here. It's an ongoing process. Each year, each incoming chair, we bring this to the forefront of our executive committee and partners, because this is something we've done over the last 6 years to make sure that we are reaffirming our commitment to DEI every year. And this is important to stay focused as who we are as an organization. Another thing is reviewing language, content, and communication materials. So Carrie spoke on this when it comes to culture, as understanding whether it's your pronouns, if it's understanding of how we are phrasing, how we're marketing positions, you know, being gender neutral or specific of what this means in this realm. It's very, those things matter. And when it comes to who's reading that, it makes you see yourself, can I be in this role, right? And also outreach to communities, make sure that people understand we want you, your talent and person here in this organization. So reach out to community specifically. We also have an annual board meeting each year focused directly on equitable economic development in this space, right? Not just the GM plant and the bigger projects, which are also super important, but also the mortar that holds those big bricks up, and people and individuals and systems wide and community wide development. And then under operational processes, we have, as each department, from attraction to marketing to business development, entrepreneurship, there are metrics when it comes to what are we doing with DEI in that space? Are we outreaching to certain communities? How many applicants of different backgrounds? Or is it a diverse pool? Do we have a diverse pool of judges to review those applications, whether our forward-facing programs or internal programs as well? From start to finish, how are we making sure that we are removing or reducing as many biases as we have as possible, and allowing top talent to have as much access as an organization as possible to thrive here? Because, right, we all have our own biases in that place. How can we reduce those as much as possible? It comes to an understanding conversation and welcome that top talent to our community and to our organization space. And then I kind of talked on it lately, I know as the final thought, it all starts with understanding in that space, really, and just iterate again. When you understand something, you can then value it. And once you value it, you treat it with the respect that it deserves in that space. So it all starts with that understanding. But I'd love to open it to any questions you may have about our approach to creating a culture which helps retain a diverse level of talent staff, as well as making sure that we as a regional economic development agency can go forward and do work to a diverse population of the Tri-County region as a whole.
Thanks, Tony, for that presentation. Very important, your connection that you make between what's happening out in the labor force and making sure that as we move forward, everyone has an opportunity to join the prosperous economy, especially as the Lansing region grows, especially with your organization's assistance. So thank you very much. And I think it's another great segue to Tony Lambert. Tony Lambert is with Techsmith Corporation, which is a growing corporation here in the mid-Michigan area. Tony, we've heard from Stephen Woodbury and Carrie about some of the bigger picture issues. Tony Willis about incorporating equity into the workforce and the workplace. What is Techsmith's experience in all of this in terms of retaining and attracting talent in this day and age? And there we go. Good.
Thank you. So I'll briefly introduce Techsmith for those that aren't familiar with us. And because I come from the engineering side of the house, I'm going to be giving a very engineering side of the house flavored view of recruiting and retention. So briefly, Techsmith is a screen capture software and solutions company, and we help folks create better images and videos for training, for tutorial, for lessons, and frankly, everyday communication. If you're going to send an email with a whole bunch of text, maybe you can get a lot more conveyed if you have a couple of images in that email, as an example. We were, you're not seeing my slides change. There we go. We were founded in 1987. So for a software company, which we are, we're kind of old from that standpoint. We have about 290 full-time employees and 24 interns. And that obviously that intern number fluctuates quite a bit. The products that we're most known for, one is called Snagit. That's focused more on the image capture, although there are some video capabilities that are a part of it, and Camtasia that focuses a lot more on the video side of the equation. So if I'm going to, if I'm an educator and I want to create lessons, I might reach for Camtasia to help me create those in a very easy way. A little bit about me. I went to MSU, both for an undergraduate and a master's program. I also worked at the U.S. Geological Survey for a long time. And I've been with Techsmith for over 19 years now. And my current role, I lead the engineers that work on our desktop and mobile products. So in my group, there are about 70 software engineers. So there's quite a few. And having been at the same company, and our headquarters is in Optimist, Michigan. So been part of the region for quite some time. So I was gonna try to talk a little bit about hiring and retention and some of the COVID impacts. So you're gonna see a lot of the high level concepts that were shared, seeing it from our perspective in the engineering group. We've been attempting to improve our hiring practices to make things more equitable. Standardization throughout our entire interview process. Here's a simple example. It used to be the case when we would get all of the resumes, we would essentially look at that list of resumes as a priority queue and try to find the most, the most impactful, most impressive resume. And then we would phone screen that person or a few people. We really got down to brass tacks on what do we want to see, what values are we looking for, and created buckets. These people meet requires, these people meet requires and preferred. And we'll go through and we'll phone screen everyone in that bucket. And that really helps improve opportunities for folks that may have had a more difficult time getting through college because they were caring for younger siblings, as an example, or were just trying to make ends meet. So that has helped us out quite a bit. We've been looking at more diverse colleges. We removed current salary from the application. If somebody was suffering significantly from salary gaps in their current role, you could disqualify a candidate. Oh, they were only making that much money. That shouldn't be part of the interview process. So gender decoders on all of our postings. There are trigger words that scare people away. The words like expert, or people may feel discouraged from applying because, boy, how do I look at myself as an expert? Et cetera, et cetera. There's a number of things, and we're always experimenting and trying to get better in this area. And I think we have a lot to learn as we go forward. So those are broadly sort of things we've been trying to do to improve our hiring practice. Now I'm going to dive into just practical things that came up due to COVID, when all of a sudden March 2020 hit and everything's full remote. How do we handle career fairs? I should note that Techsmith is trying to grow our engineering staff. We are trying to invest more heavily in grow in our engineering team. So we care deeply about our recruiting process, about our onboarding process, et cetera. But all of a sudden, we had to figure out, how do we handle whiteboard exercises? How do we handle lunch? What was the purpose of taking the candidate to lunch? How did we do we handle programming exercises? How do we assess people? We used to get into a room together and discuss, well, how do we handle that? Is the Zoom effective for that? How about simple things like a person hires in, their first day in the office, we would go through a set of forms, like filling out an I-9 form, for example. How do you handle that in a full remote world? And so like all these things that were sort of practical and simple because you're just used to doing it, we had to retool. Now, a combination of DocuSign, Zoom, and JobVite, which is our applicant service that we use, is how we handle in a compliant way getting I-9 forms signed. Onboarding, if for retention, it's critical that we create strong social connections amongst our staff. We care deeply about our culture and how, when someone's onboarding, how do you get folks the support they need to be successful? Some of our new hires are someone that's fresh out of college. So that's always a difficult transition in someone's life. So imagine you finish college and your friends disperse to all their different jobs, and maybe you don't have a significant other and you're living alone in an apartment working remote. How isolated do you feel? How can we help that person along? We've got to manage with a lot of empathy to help people through these times. And I felt like this person's struggle of like they're working in their living room kind of depicted that well. And we've got a lot of different ways we try to help people. We have coffee chats. We have team building events. In the summertime, when it's nicer out, we erected a big tent, and we would let teams, what's the word? Not retain, reserve the tent. So we could bring in Qdoba or something to try to do it in a safe way, given COVID's going on. So let's try to do it outdoors and create opportunities like that. Some of our teams get together and schedule like board game afternoon. So, Thursday starting at 3:00, we'll get together and we'll play certain games. Scribble.io is an example, but there's a lot of online board game style things that our staff can endeavor to play in. When it's nicer out, we'll have events like kayaking on the Grand River in Lansing, just a variety of different things to try to create some connection. But it's hard, and it is. I do feel like we have a lot of room to grow here. I think we're failing, even though we're trying. Let's see. Internships. How do you run a fully remote internship? So what we heard is a lot of internships over the 2020 summer were just canceled on people, and we felt that wasn't right. So we had to figure out, how can we get people the support they need? How can we get them a computer? Do we have them log into a remote machine running in the cloud? Do we ship an intern a laptop? Do we have enough laptops because of supply chain problems? So the answer was all of the above. Some of the interns got a machine for the summer. Some logged into a remote machine that was running in the cloud. A person was assigned a mentor and a manager, so they had two people by default that they could reach out to. How do we recreate social connections? Like we used to have, when we were all in person, every couple of weeks, the interns all got together and did an activity together. So they had a cohort that they could be working with and just doing some activity, learning from one another, et cetera. Well, how do you recreate that in a remote world? Is another example. So there's just so many practical challenges. When you look at our existing experienced staff, the pressure for more hybrid work, more remote work is accelerated. Obviously, the company has continued to function in a full remote capacity. So the staff's like, so this works. So can I, rent out a trailer and drive around the US and find hotspots to work all day? So, you know, traditionally, Techsmith had to be one of the best places to work in our area. But now we have engineers that work, our area has engineers that work for Etsy, for Spotify, for Netflix, Squarespace, Firefox, and they're all able to do so successfully remotely. And what that has done to us is take the talent market that we're competing in and just exploded it. So, you know, and the other thing that's interesting to see is folks were comfortable and safe. Techsmith was able to work completely remote. So you had this sort of like pent up, I'm not looking for a job because there's so much uncertainty for our staff. And then you got that pent up demand as things are getting a little bit more open and things in the environment, coupled with the increased remote options, means that time that we spend essentially fending off talent competition is like I've spent hours trying to keep 3 of our employees in the last few weeks because of salary increases. Now, you guys talked about inflation. Look at software engineer salaries. It's absurd, the amount of growth that we're seeing in the market. And you can go and find that. So the salary sort of bands that we have has had to change significantly. Techsmith recently became an ESOP, an employee stock ownership program, if you're familiar with that. So it's a partial employee owned company at this point. We had intended to do that, but we certainly accelerated that because we're a private company and we are competing with companies that are privately owned, that have stock options and a variety of other things that we have to be able to compete against. I could go on and on. I think I'm about out of time here. And I wasn't able to get to all the things I was hoping to chat about.
Well, Tony, I think you've done a great job, though, taking it down really to the employer level, and the things that you're doing right now are is affirmation of what I've been reading. We had a question in there just a moment ago about stock options, and then you touched on the ESOP point. So I greatly appreciate that. And I greatly appreciate everyone taking their time here today, both the presenters and folks to be with us. A couple of questions. Some are general. So Tony or someone, either Tony or Carrie or Stephen can chime in. But maybe Tony Lambert, what's the one thing you wish you knew in 2019 that we know now in 2022 that might have helped you prepare for this moment in time?
Boy. I think there are a number of things. I can't pick one thing.
Okay.
First of all, tooling, like remote tooling. We had a few people in the organization had Zoom accounts. The rest of the organization did not.
Mm-hmm.
What are better ways to do retrospectives, where we try to figure out what went wrong and what we want to do better going forward? So right across the board, tooling would have been awesome to have a better plan walking into full remote.
Great.
Better tooling to analyze salaries in a much broader talent market. I'm not kidding when I say that it's a transformative impact for us to have to compete against a Spotify, a Squarespace, and Etsy, et cetera. So being able to find workable, important data that helps us make sure we're paying our staff fairly as another tool that I think would have been very helpful for us. And we're a bit in the scrambling nature. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Anyone else want to take on that question? Carrie or Tony Willis or Stephen? Again, what's the one thing maybe you've learned that you wish you knew? Or that we could have been better prepared for, like Tony Lambert just mentioned tooling, Zoom as an issue. Carrie?
think from my perspective, it's really taught me about the need for flexibility. As an organization and as a society, we have to be willing to be flexible and accommodating, because now, or if this happens in the future, there are going to be challenges that we've never run into before. And our employees are going to need our assistance more than they ever have before, because that work-life intersection in this scenario has been unprecedented, is what I would say. The good thing is I think we have some policy changes now that we are familiar with and we can lean and look at. You know, if this ever happens again, we now have a remote work policy in my office. We now have Zoom accounts. We now have the way to be able to connect in a virtual format, which was new for so many industries. So I think, you know, just proactively thinking, I wish I would have had stock in Zoom, that's for sure, before this all started. But I think, you know, there's always going to be new things to come up against, so you have to be flexible and creative.
Carrie, I think that was actually, that answer hit on two questions, because there was another one that we had about any proactive work being done that might help protect firms and labor from the next pandemic or disaster. So I appreciate that. Stephen or Tony Willis, anything you'd like to add?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tony.
No, I was gonna say, I echo what both Tony Lambert and Carrie said there in that space. Flexibility is important. Knowing that the work and people can do stuff remotely, and that also it's all about progress. You know, that things have changed now post-pandemic, and knowing that they will continue to change. There's no necessarily going back to that way. That is, so don't no longer try to necessarily go back to that way. Keep adapting to the circumstances that we're in this space. And I think it's always be mindful of the adaptation of our current culture and climate as it has evolved, has changed the next step, and keep looking forward in that space.
Great. Dr. Woodbury?
I just wanted to, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but all Carrie and Tony and both Tonys all raised this, which is the issue of culture and how important it has become. And I wonder, I think it would have become more important anyway, but I wonder how much more it has become important because of the isolation of remoteness. I've seen, I'm on leave right now at the Upjohn Institute, and I've seen especially employees who've arrived in the last couple of years. You know, it's obvious we haven't done enough for them to you know, make them feel comfortable, give them what they need to succeed, as Tony Lambert was talking about. If you three of you have more comments on that, I'd really be interested to hear them.
From my perspective, I would say it's taken a different approach to leadership in some ways. You know, I've always viewed my leadership style as a servant leader, meaning that my goal is to provide the resources that my team needs to be successful. In this circumstance, I think that leadership approach has been beneficial because it's taking your lead from what your employees need, and that helps with the retention efforts. I saw that there was a question there about retention too, and I think you have to think about it through an emotional intelligence lens. You have to think about it through a leadership lens. All of those things are critically important right now in the climate that we are in, and I think that's going to stay the case with the generations that we have coming up next in the workforce.
Great answer. Thank you, Carrie, for that.
Thank you.
Let's see. We had I think Tony answered a question in the box about not just stock options, but what are other incentives people are using to attract talent and keep talent. Tony, you mentioned you've been working 3 weeks on several weeks on just keeping a few employees there. So that takes a lot of energy. What are you hearing from them as to what they're looking for?
And what often happens is, so there's this notion that we talk about internally of your shields up versus shields down. And what I mean by that are you a happy, engaged employee at Techsmith, and you've got your shield up for anybody, you know, any folks trying to poach you, so to speak, for another role. And you know, is a person have their shields down, in which case they're going to listen to potential opportunities. So one of the what often happens is email or some kind of experience happens where somebody's dangled a significant salary bump in a carrot in front of them. And then for us, we have to address that in some way, shape, or form. But what also often is the case is there was a reason why they didn't have their shield up. There was an environmental issue. There was something going on. And so whenever one of those comes up, it's like a two-pronged approach. Like, first, let's consider the financial aspect of this, but let's also think about what is the environmental situation that caused that person not to instantly deflect that request. And it takes time and energy, and it takes a lot of trust and empathy to try to get to the heart of what's going on environmentally that led to that. And so I put in a textual answer around this space, but empathy, especially in this day and age, with all the things that people are going through, with the childcare demands. You've got a 3-year-old asking you for something while you're trying to be in the middle of a Zoom and you're also trying to figure out when you can make lunch. We got to be understanding and create that space. I think that's probably the most effective thing, because if I don't have that trust, if I don't have that empathetic world, that person's just going to go, and we're not going to have any chance to keep them. So we've done a decent job culturally so that we actually have a chance to interact with that person and correct those environmental issues. Other items that we've rolled out a flexible work benefit that will have I didn't get to this, but we're building a new headquarters building, and imagine trying to figure out how to build a new headquarters while this all happened. I could talk at length about that in and of itself. But so what will folks expect when that new building is opened? We've shared clarity around that. Where can you work from? So lots of requests. Everybody's remote anyway. Can I just work from, I don't know,
Fiji?
Pick a country, pick a state. Student loan payback assistance. So someone comes in, maybe we can help them pay off their student loans over time, some kind of monthly stipend or something like that for that. Dollars to help people improve their home office. People started out working at home on, a folding chair, and maybe at their kitchen table, hunched over, having back problems and things. So I think there's a lot of levers that folks could explore pulling on, and we've been trying a variety of them. I've talked too much.
Super. Thanks, Tony. No, that was fantastic. As I said, this has been a wonderful session, very informative, and I greatly appreciate all the work that you four are doing to bring to light some of these issues and work with both employees and employers and understand the space that we're in. And hopefully we'll get through this together. I think that if there's one constant, it's the word change, and it's going to continue. So greatly appreciate your time being here today. Greatly appreciate all those who attended. We'll be posting both the presentations and a video recording of this on our website. I hope you had an opportunity to fill out the evaluation, and join us next month, March 22nd, when we'll have a discussion of the various tax plans that are being floated around the legislature this spring. So again, thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Tony.